This happened to me when I was around 10 years old. I've lived in Idaho all my life and spent a lot of time outside or in the wilderness as a kid. My grandparents would take me on camping trips, and my older brother and I would always hike up whatever trails we could find to get a view of the sunset. On one of these occasions, something terrifying happened. We were up at a campsite I only know as Warm River. The river there always freezes over, and my brother and I were on a regular evening hike. There was an old tunnel boarded through the mountain at one part of the trail, probably an old train tunnel, and we were walking through it when I heard something I'll never forget. After walking through probably 2/3 of the way through the tunnel, I heard a terrible screech at the end that we entered through. The screech wasn't like anything I've ever heard before. I've heard a lot of screams of animals on the dark and windy nights. I even think I've heard Bigfoot calls a few times, but never the metallic, grinding screech I heard that day. The point is, whatever the sound was, did not sound natural in any capacity. I probably jumped 5 feet in the air when I heard it, and my brother shouted a few choice curses before shooing me quickly to the end of this tunnel. At this point, my brother decided we should just continue walking and head back after whatever made that noise hopefully cleared out. We didn't have any firearms on us, so I was pretty upset. My brother reassured me that we would be fine, and we made the walk back without any incidents. However, I didn't get any sleep that night, whether it was that thing that screeched at us or just my imagination. I heard things moving around the campsite the whole night, as well as whispers echoing through the darkness outside of the trailer. I woke up my brother a few times to check out what it was, but he refused each time, telling me that it was probably just other campers staying up late and enjoying themselves. The rest of the trip was pretty normal. We packed up the following day and my life continued as normal. I was disconcerted but chalked what happened up as harmless events that I must have just been exaggerating in retrospect. A few weeks later, I went to the Pine Basin, an old ski lodge my family rented each year for family reunions. Here I would mess around with my cousins, our favorite games and activities being night games. We would play hide and seek, a game called Ghost in the Graveyard, and other games like that. On one instance, I was chosen to be the seeker for hide and seek because I was the younger cousin. I got a flashlight as an advantage. Normally, all the younger cousins hid close to the lodge, and the older cousins hid in nearby trees or at the base of the nearby mountain. As I was searching near the bottom of this mountain, I heard a familiar whistle up the mountain. We would always whistle as a hint of our locations. It sounded like someone was hiding way up in the tree, and this tree was known as the underwear tree. You can guess why. So I began trekking up towards the whistle. As I climbed closer, I got an unease feeling in my stomach. I continued on warily and convincing myself that I would be fine. I hated walking in that night alone, but figured whoever that I would find would walk me back to the lodge. As I neared the tree, I noticed that it was deathly silent. This alerted me that something was very wrong because you could always hear the adults having fun back at the lodge. I was anxious to hurry back, so I called out, "I found you, Scott." I thought the whistle was my older cousin's. "Come back down with me." I got no reply, but I wasn't planning on waiting. As I began walking down the path, I heard a voice. "You almost had me." So I ran back to investigate. I flashed my light in the branches of the tree and saw a monstrosity that was not my cousin. It looked like a poorly drawn stick figure made into a human with its emaciated figure and lifeless eyes. I remember its face looked like the skin on its head was pulled from behind. It had torn and stretched features. As soon as I saw this creature, I screamed, dropped my flashlight, and ran back to the lodge. The entire time I ran, I was overcome by an overpowering smell, and I could hear that thing running after me. As I approached the camp, I saw a few people, my cousins, at the bottom of the mountain, waiting for me. I was crying and shaking, and they took me inside. I told my dad what happened, but my cousins all said that they didn't see anything following me. The adults kept us inside for the night, and I kept hearing different sounds drifting in from the mountains. I never played night games after that happened, and was always terrified that my cousins wouldn't listen to my warnings. Ever since that night, I have always felt uneasy up in those mountains. I used to be really religious and figured it was a demon of some kind trying to kill me or something like that, but those mountains have never felt the same after that incident. A few years ago, the game Until Dawn became popular and I watched a walkthrough on it on YouTube. When the Wendigo first appeared in the game, I got chills down my spine. It was exactly what I saw, and I did a ton of research of them. I figured someone must have gotten snowed in at the lodge and resorted to cannibalism, but that doesn't explain what happened at Warm River. I still hear that screech from time to time. It never occurred to me until I'm watching Until Dawn that they might be from the same thing, and it scares the hell out of me every time. I heard it earlier tonight, and that's why I decided to finally write my story down. Wish me luck. Reddit. When I was 8 years old, both of my parents worked full-time. My dad was predominantly on the third shift at his job, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. We lived literally right up the road from my grandparents in a very small town. It was getting close to my 9th birthday when I contracted strep throat and scarlet fever. I was severely sick, could barely even speak, had the first case of cold sweats that I remember in my life, and could barely pull myself out of bed to even use the restroom. I was absolutely miserable, and of course, being as young as I was, I didn't take the pain very well. My poor mother was at a loss of what to even do with her working and dad needing to use the daylight hours to sleep. The first day I was sick, perhaps it was Tuesday, my birthday would fall on the Friday. My dad stayed up most of the day with me, made me food, let me sleep in his lap on the couch, wiped my forehead down, made sure that I took my medication, etc. But on the second day, my grandmother had called and offered to let me stay at her house so my dad could get some sleep. He said yes and woke me up around 7 in the morning to drive me up to her home. My grandfather also worked at this time too, so he was already gone to work when I arrived there. I don't remember too much of the early morning. I probably just slept in my grandmother's bed, tossing and turning when I'd wake up feeling extra bad. She encouraged me to swallow my awful tasting medicine a little more gently than my dad did. She did fix me some tomato soup to try and eat, and it was the first time since I had gotten sick that I actually had an appetite. I should mention that my grandmother has this cute little Yorkshire Terrier named Samson. He was very docile, not like usual annoying, barking all the time type of terrier. Samson came into the room and curled up next to me as I dozed. I do know that when I woke up at some point, it had to be early afternoon, lunchtime, because I could hear the TV faintly from the living room on some game show. My grandmother had a ritual of eating her lunch while watching a game show. I think it was like The Price is Right. I was trying to fall back asleep because I had gotten this really bad headache, maybe from dehydration. I was on the verge of falling asleep when I jolted awake by the "Samson!" yelp that erupted from the living room. The terrier curled up next to my feet, perked up, but didn't move. I knew I had heard his name being called too, but it was odd. He didn't respond. "Samson!" my grandmother called again. "Samson! Samson!" the dog still didn't run out of the room to her. I was confused as he was very obedient to my grandmother. He was almost frozen, staring at the cracked open door, but making no attempt to go to her. She called again. "Samson!" Maybe 3 or 4 times more. Then I got annoyed. I remember flinging the covers off of me. Of course, my clothes are sticky and sweaty, and I generally feel uncomfortable and groggy. I stumbled out of the room, wiping my eyes, asking, "Grandma, do you need Samson? He's in the room with me." I'm in the living room, and I have to do a double take. The TV is still on and blaring. There's a bowl of soup sitting on the coffee table, and an open Pepsi next to it. But my grandmother isn't anywhere to be found. Maybe she's in the bathroom. I crossed the room and went past the kitchen. Empty too. I got to the bathroom door, which was shut, and knocked. Nothing. I then opened it. No one was in there. The house is empty. It's not a huge house either. I've covered all of the rooms. So yes, my first reaction was to get scared. I could clearly hear my grandmother calling for the dog, but she's not anywhere inside. I can feel my hand and feet getting a little tingly. I started shouting for my grandma, but my voice is just echoing through the small, cramped home. Samson had gotten up at this point and was sitting near the couch, looking completely undisturbed. I fumbled for the remote and turned the TV off and yelled, more like wheezed, to the top of my lungs, which you can imagine was very painful, and it was very scratchy and I had an infected throat. "Grandma!" The worst part happened next. I heard her shouting my name back, clear as ever, like she was standing only a few feet away from me. I started crying now, scared out of my mind. I feel like maybe it has to be a ghost. I grew up with scary ghost stories, courtesy of my dad, and I'm convinced now that I'm in a room with a ghost, and then she, or whatever this was, proceeded to call my name again. Then, there was a second voice. Definitely not my grandmother's. It was deep, definitely more masculine, and absolutely terrifying as it shouted, "Come to the front door." I did not do that. Instead, I made sure to run back to my grandmother's bedroom, lock the door, and pick up the telephone on their nightstand. I called my own home phone, and my dad's sleepy voice answered. Through a barely comprehensible voice, I managed to croak something like, "Daddy, there's someone in the house, and I can't find Grandma. She's gone." My dad, of course, said that he jumped out of bed, grabbed his Swiss Army knife that he kept in the drawer next to the bed, and ran down the road to the house in his PJs and bare feet. He ran up to the front door, jingled the handle. It was locked, so he made his way around, and since he knew the garage code, he just punched it in and got inside. A quick sweep of the 3 rooms of the home, and it showed that no one was in there. It's not like there was really anywhere else to hide. I ran out of the room once I was sure that he was there and began bawling in his arms. He kept reassuring me that no one was here, and then asked if I did know where Grandma was possibly. I said I hadn't and explained that I had woken up from her calling for Samson, but she hadn't been anywhere there. This was back when cell phones were definitely around, but there were no iPhones, and my grandmother certainly wouldn't have been buying them anyway. My dad had one, but not on him at the time. I could tell that he was trying to keep calm, so he just said that we need to go back to our house. I was sure he was probably going to call the police at that point, just because my grandmother still hadn't popped up, and her car had been in the garage when he got in. If she'd left, she'd gone on foot. We hadn't even made it 2 steps out of the driveway when from my grandma's neighbor's house, my grandma was strolling out, chatting to our neighbor. She saw my dad and then me, crying my eyes out, and immediately ran over to see what was wrong. She was super apologetic. She said that she'd stepped out right when she had heated up her soup to go see her neighbor, who called about looking at something my grandmother was going to buy. My grandmother had figured that I was asleep and that she'd only be gone for about 10 or 15 minutes. At first, people may have assumed I was feverish, therefore delusional, but I still stand by what happened. I know for a fact I was definitely alone in the house, save for Samson, but the voices that I heard were real. For a while, I was hesitant to go back to my grandmother's house because this happened in the middle of the day. I later read some stories at school about Wendigos, or creatures that would disguise their voices to lure people. This was the closest explanation that I could ever form about what I heard. I never shared to anyone that I thought that it was for sure a Wendigo and just chalked it up to maybe it just being a ghost. I'm close to my 20s now. Last year was the first time I shared this story fully with my grandpa, who used to just say that fever must have made me had bad dreams. We were sitting on the front porch of the house, smoking cigarettes and exchanging anecdotes. When I finished telling him, for the first time he looked sort of disturbed about it. He finally put his cigarette out and just stared out into the road. Then he cleared his throat, looked over at me. "You know," he said slowly, "some funny things used to happen around that time, in the middle of the night. I'd wake up to take a piss or something. When I'd first get up out of bed, I could hear your grandma sleeping away, snoring." He chuckled, but his face grew serious again. "Anyways, I'd always hear her calling for the dog. I tried to remain looking calm, but my voice still shook as I asked him, even when she was sleeping? Sleep talking?" "No." He shook his head. "I heard her call from outside. Maybe the living room. I don't know, honey. She'd call for the dog. She'd call my name, all while she was really sleeping next to me. Sleeping like a baby." "Have you ever told anyone?" "No, I don't want to scare her. She's real scared of the idea like ghosts and stuff. That's why when you were younger and that thing happened, I told her just remember you'd been sick. Fever and all. Probably have nightmares." He looked gravely at me. "Don't repeat this to her, please, honey. She's really not the type of being scared." Of course. I wanted to cry. I had this itchy, creepy feeling suddenly about being at that house. "Grandpa, do you still hear it sometimes?" "Oh, yes." He was now reaching into his breast pocket to get out another cigarette. "Every night. But you just gotta remember not to do what it says. Even the dog figured it out. If it says to come to the door, you stay away from that door. If it says, I don't know, come here, you just stay still in that room until it quits calling." With that, he asked to borrow my lighter. Again. Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this and you would like to see more, make sure to like, comment, and if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. We've got a lot of content, a lot more coming, so just know that. But make sure to check out the links in the description as well, like Twitter, Instagram, everything like that is in there. And my Gmail if you want to submit a story. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this, because it was pretty fun to read. But with that being said, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one.